Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief of Commercial Integrator, and welcome to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. So happy to be joined today by Steve Greenblatt, who is President and Founder of Control Concepts. What we're talking about today is selling services and knowledge and expertise, pivoting your business so that you can be a specialist or a niche provider in some kind of knowledge or service or expertise focused area that's going to enable you to pivot your entire business so as to be more profitable and more sustainable over the long run. This conversation is in depth and I hope it's incredibly valuable for everyone listening. Again, welcome to AV Plus.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page. And please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
Really happy to be joined today by Steve Greenblatt, who is President and Founder of Control Concepts. Thanks so much for being here, Steve.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you and talk to this audience.
I really appreciate you being here. So what we're going to be talking about today is something that Commercial Integrator has been beating the drum on for quite a while, which is selling knowledge, selling expertise, selling your specialization, not just being a reseller. So I've been in the industry since 2004. I know you've been in the industry a lot of years, Steve. Can you just to set the table before we kind of dive into the specifics, talk about some of the evolution we've seen in the commercial AV industry over the last couple of decades. I know when I started in 2004, it wasn't really unheard of for someone to be a product reseller who did really good installations, but they didn't have a whole lot of services. They weren't thinking about RMR. They weren't necessarily thinking about selling their knowledge. Over the last couple of decades, what changes have you seen as an industry participant and an industry observer in terms of the need to move away from just being a product reseller and instead to be a specialist knowledge provider?
Back when I started, and I'm going to say it is in the 90s, what we did was fairly magical. There was a lot, even the prevalence of the internet was not there. So the ability to get involved in AV and have AV and understand how to implement AV, especially integration, was really a real special talent and was really unique and in demand and limited to the professionals that did it. And at that time, you really needed to trust and believe in those professionals to guide you in the right direction. And something as simple as touching a touch screen, which we all commonly do right now from our phones, and we probably couldn't be moving in our lives today without it, was magical, because I remember in the beginning that people would think that they were going to break the screen by touching it. So we've come quite a ways from that, and since then there's been a lot more focus on AV. There's been a lot more of a commerce that has grown through the internet. There's been a lot more information sharing. There's been a lot more education of clients and end users, and the ability just to get along by selling equipment and selling boxes and being transactional is not getting the job done, if you will. And you need to be able to add some special sauce to it. You need to be able to put a unique twist on it, solve a problem, address a need, build a relationship, and be a client partner. And I think that the clients have also changed quite a bit over the recent years, in that they're hiring more people from the industry. They're becoming more in the know, which is a great thing. And they're becoming more of not only an educated client, but a client that's very capable. And there's been a lot more pressure put on the professional industry to raise their game, because the clients these days, they want to know, what are we going to bring to the table that they don't already know? And they want somebody that's going to be able to help dig in, understand their business, understand them, understand their specific situation, and be able to advise them. And selling the equipment is really just something that comes along in that equation. It's the solution that they're looking for, and also having a trusted partner that they can rely on.
I think that trusted partner element is particularly important. And you mentioned, reselling products and things of that nature with margins as they are at this point, hardware margins in particular. It just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that one can build a sustainable business on when you're talking about maybe 12 points or 13 points or whatever it is of margin in some cases. Talking about those knowledgeable end users, however, the organization HETMA obviously popped into my mind. Those higher education technology managers, they're really coming into their own. And you're seeing a lot of higher education institutions have these in-house integrators and in-house tech teams that in some ways arguably are kind of crowding out the third-party AV integrators, the professional AV companies the Commercial Integrator really caters to. So in terms of recognizing that, especially on education campuses, you have some very knowledgeable end users and technology managers, many of whom are capable of doing some of these jobs on their own. Can you talk about the importance of and explain how integrators can, in fact, demonstrate their expertise and demonstrate their knowledge so that someone like Joe Way at USC is going to say, I need to bring on this third-party integrator? How do they do that?
So it first starts with listening. It first starts with understanding the client and being able to get in the door so that they will open up to you, and they will invest in you and know that you're worth speaking with. So demonstrating your knowledge, bringing something to the table that they may not already have, and then trying to demonstrating respect and then showing that there may be some things that we know that we can draw from our vast experience with a bunch of clients that are maybe the same people that are in their shoes, or even in other adjacent industries or other types of verticals where we can say this worked, this didn't work. So we could be saving a lot of time. And there's also a difference between doing something and also doing it maybe in a more efficient way or a more effective way, or something that is easier to maintain or easier to manage. So it's similar to when you're using software, let's say Microsoft Office. Everybody can use it, but how many people know how to use it on an advanced level? So being able to bring some type of expertise like that to the table, but also respecting, and that's really important, that the people that are employed by these organizations, they're not just newcomers, and they shouldn't just be thought of as end users. They should be thought of also as AV professionals. Many of them transferred from being on one side of the fence to the other. So they are people that have been through a lot of the same things that we've been through.
I think that is a very important point to emphasize. I mean, I was part of the HETMA online conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the commonalities I heard from a lot of those higher education technology managers is wanting to be treated with a certain level of respect for their knowledge and their capabilities and their ability to facilitate outstanding experiences for professors and teachers and administrators and students. And it's not as though they don't want to work with AV integrators. I mean, I know a lot of them need AV integrators for various aspects of their jobs, but they also don't want to be perceived as babes in the woods, where it's like we're helpless without an AV integration company coming onto our campus, because most certainly they are not. So it's a matter of treating them with respect and finding ways that the AV integration company can complement their offerings and fill in gaps, as opposed to saying we need to do everything for you. Is that about right?
I would very much agree with what you just said. And it's not an easy thing for everybody to look at, but it is an important thing, because if you want to be involved and you want to be as part of that equation, you have to figure out where you could fill in the gaps, where, as you said, and also where can you add value.
So speaking of adding value, I think one of the questions I want to talk about is AV integrators, a lot of times, at least historically speaking, have kind of been the one man or one woman shop where they do everything. They do everything from the design to the installation. They pull the wires. They mightn't be involved in the programming. Now it seems, though, if we're focusing on selling expertise and selling knowledge, it might make more sense to niche your company to some extent, or develop a certain specialty or a certain nuance that you can offer better than anyone. What is your feeling on the idea of trying to specialize your business? And even if you do other things, being a recognized leader in programming or whatever the case might be, cybersecurity, networking, et cetera.
Right now, that's really key, and especially since everybody talked a lot about pivots during the pandemic, and how can we find the opportunity? Because usually I believe that where there's a downturn in the market, or there's a lack of opportunity in one area, it usually means that there's a growth or a abundance or some newfound opportunity in another area. So being able to go and focus in on that and niche, and when we say that, it means becoming more of a specialist. So generalists are easy because you can say, just tell me what you need and I'll do it. And I'm a jack of all trades. But it's very hard to recommend somebody who is a generalist. But if you're a specialist, it's easy to be thought of and to say that this is who I go to when I need something in a certain way. So for me, I mean, we're a programming company. We're a little bit different, but it starts with, okay, what is the market that you serve? Do you serve commercial or residential? Then do you serve a certain vertical in that market? And then maybe it goes even further and say, do I serve a certain type of client? Maybe only smaller scale or larger scale, maybe only enterprise level. And then you could even go further and say, I am somebody who should be thought of as a software developer versus an AV programmer. So it's a little bit, you really try to create this unique identity so that when people think, I have this particular need, they think of you first.
So one question I have is, obviously there are kind of exogenous factors in our industry and in our society that are making certain areas particularly attractive. I mean, like UC&C is growing like gangbusters at this point. AV over IP is very strong. So there's certain demands that I think are just going to be very strong over the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. Would your advice be to AV integrators watching this, that they should, kind of lick their finger, put it in the wind and see what is in demand and try to specialize in those areas? Or is it something that's more organic to the individual company, where you look at your own internal assets and say, whether or not this might be hyper in demand at this moment, this is what my team and my company culture and my organization is particularly strong at. So I'm not going to try to chase after the number 1 or 2 or number 3 technology or vertical categories per se. I'm going to lead with what works for me internally or organically.
I think the latter, as you just said, is I try to look at it in 3 criteria. I say, what do we do very well? What do people appreciate us doing? And where and how does that overlap with the market demand and the ability to be profitable? So you have to look at those 3 opportunities and how they overlap, because you also have to think about the team that you have. So even though you may want to go after a certain area, if you think that that's the hot, new, trendy area, if you don't have the team and the knowledge and the skill set to be able to fill that need, there's going to be a mismatch. So it really does have to be something that is, you can't just look at the strength of your team and say what you want to do. It also has to factor in as to where the market needs are. But a combination of those is what's really critical.
Absolutely. So just in terms of finding that sustainable revenue from selling services and selling knowledge and things of that nature, if you look at Commercial Integrators research, we're still seeing a lot of integration firms saying they're maybe making 5% of their revenue from services or 10% of their revenue from services. And obviously, I don't have a pie in the sky vision. I realize it's not as simple as just flipping a switch and saying, now we're a service-oriented company, voila. Do you think that there's some hesitancy to pivot, to use the word that you used before? Do you feel like there's whether reluctance or not quite sure how to reorient a business? Is there complacency? How would you characterize what may arguably be relatively slow pivot or change in this regard? Or is it not really that slow of a pivot or a change given the magnitude of what we're asking people to do, or at least advocating people to consider?
Well, I think change is hard for everybody, and especially when something has worked in the past. So it's really hard to say that I'm going to make a radical change and potentially cut off something that may work or may still work in a certain degree to go after something that is unproven or uncomfortable or is different. And so I think that that's hard for everybody. That's human nature. And there's a business book called The Pumpkin Plan that I really am a big fan of. And what that says is that if you want to grow a world-class pumpkin, you need to cut off all of the pumpkins from the vine that are going to prevent you from growing that world-class pumpkin. The author is Mike Michalowicz, but it's a tough strategy to follow, because sometimes you are really casting away some revenue streams or sources that are a positive impact right now, but you have to be playing for the future. But if you're going to make a pivot and you're going to say that I feel like the market and where my best chance of succeeding is in a very different direction, you really have to move away from what you were doing in the past and sometimes sacrifice in the short term to win in the long term.
And I know that is not always an easy thing to do. I was recently doing an interview with a pretty major distributor in our industry, and they were talking about some major changes that they made quite intentionally in their line card and walking away from a substantial amount of money because they wanted to reorient their business and focus on the most sustainable areas and their strongest areas. And it takes a certain boldness and a certain, throw caution to the wind, but I believe in this attitude. And I know that can be very challenging. Talking about those kind of leaders in industry, I think we would be remiss not to talk a little bit about control concepts and its recognized leadership position in the programming category. You talked about pivoting. Can you talk a bit about how your business has pivoted over the years and ways you've focused on leaning into your specialization, leaning into your knowledge and your expertise? Because you're not just speaking about this, as an academic or something. You're talking from your own personal experience about how to orient your business for maximum success.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and I certainly can. About 10 to 12 years ago, we started to think about what does this industry need to be able to do some things a little bit differently. And what we came upon was the addition of modern programming languages into the AV space. And it took some time for us to wrap our arms around what does that look like and what does that end up being in terms of a service or a product or a solution. And we came upon that we were going to specialize in working with manufacturers to make their products easy for programmers and integrators to work with from a control perspective. And what was very nice as we went down that journey is we realized that projects are becoming easier to program because there's less components, there's a little less complexity on the programming side. And some of that is due to the rise of configuration software, because that makes the effort of programming a lot easier, not needing to know the syntax and being able to do a lot more, use programmers or technicians to be able to put together systems without having to do some of the behind the scenes heavy lifting. So what we decided was, let's take that on. Our skill set really is a good fit for that behind the scenes heavy lifting. And that's really where we focused. And for us, it was a great thing too, because we also saw our business shifting. There was less of a demand for outsourcing, at least in the market that we were covering or the clients we were working with. There were many different factors that said to us, this is the right fit and this is something that we should pursue. But it's been a long journey, and COVID certainly forced us to make even greater decisions to lean into that pivot.
So speaking of rather leaning into that pivot, obviously, you leveraged your internal talents and the knowledge of your staff and the knowledge of your team. Can you give us some insights into how to craft the right team to be able to leverage those talents? I mean, is it the idea of getting a bunch of masters in the same kind of category and just being an utter master and having a lot of people who are very familiar with a particular topic? Or are you trying to find some diversity in the sense of different expertises and different strengths? And is that the best way to be kind of a master of your domain? Are you looking for uniformity of knowledge, or are you looking for like a very heterogeneous group of people who complement each other rather than amplifying each other? Is it about complementing or is it about amplifying?
Definitely complementing. There needs to be a very common belief and a commitment to the direction of the organization. There needs to be people who identify with the core values, with the focus, with the intent of what you're doing and why you're unique and what are your differentiators. And then those people become your differentiator because they're what makes your team special and that's who your clients get to work with. But to answer your question, I use marketing to help to attract new people who want to be a part of what we're doing because they feel what we're doing is different. And so a lot of them are looking to be able to take a step to invest in their own future and say that I've done this aspect of this career or this profession in the past. I want a challenge. I want to be able to take a step in a different direction. And I feel like this is a good fit for me. And what we do is we try to use our interview process to be able to not only find the right people who we think are going to be a good fit for us, but we also want them to feel that they are going to make a commitment to this team. And we almost are selling ourselves to them through that process.
That's a very interesting observation because especially with what they call, the great resignation these days, it seems like in a lot of cases, the strongest companies are in fact trying to sell themselves to prospective employees. It almost is like the power dynamic has shifted rather than the employee trying at every moment to sell herself or himself to the company. The best companies who want the very best talent have to convince that talent that they're doing something bold and exciting and stimulating, and it's going to give them growth opportunities, not just financial growth opportunities, but intellectual and skills-based growth opportunities. So I would imagine you would be an advocate, whether you're a programming company like Control Concepts or an integrator or a consultant, that part of what you're going to do to attract that talent that's going to enable you to pivot is actually telling them that my organization is going to give you as an individual an opportunity to pivot and grow and learn new skills and be part of something new and different. It's not going to be a stagnating company. It's going to be a company that's on the move, and you're going to move along with it.
And I think that's what attracts a lot of people, but it also repels other people, and that's okay. And that's kind of what business is all about. You want to attract your clients that are going to resonate with you, and there's going to be some that don't believe and don't feel connected to you, and those are just not the right fit, and that's the way it is. And we're better off that way because you don't want to find people that you feel you are pursuing or coercing or trying to sell on you that are not going to stay. So it's very critical that it needs to be a mutual decision, and it needs to be something where there's a shared interest and a shared commitment.
So what I always call my journalism 101 question is there anything that you would love to have talked about that I haven't given you an opportunity to speak on? I mean, we've talked a little bit about curating the right team, pivoting as an organization, leaning into a niche or a specialty that's going to differentiate you, focusing on selling services as opposed to just trying to be a hardware reseller, selling your knowledge and your expertise. Is there anything you might want to amplify or build upon about any of those points in with respect to how Control Concepts does that, or just as an industry observer, someone who's been in the industry for a few decades and has seen a lot come and go and knows what he's talking about?
So I think that the best thing that I could offer in terms of advice is invest in the industry, and whether it's something where you're volunteering, whether you're attending different training, you're going to networking events, you're participating in just industry activities, trade shows, conferences, and also online. And I think you and I have gotten to know each other, as I've gotten to know a number of people just through simply being online and being out there and getting to know each other in different parts and learning different aspects of each other. These are all great ways to strengthen relationships. And this is a great way to build a network. And this is just, it's also just a very feel-good approach to be evolving yourself as a professional and demonstrating that you're committed to the industry. So that's what I've always done. A lot of it has been natural, some of it has been intentional, but it's just really important that if this industry is important to you, then you have to also give back, and you have to show that you are going to support it, and you're going to support other people, and you're really a true participant, not somebody who's just looking to gain from it.
I second that. I couldn't agree more. I think almost everybody, I would imagine, thinks in some way that their industry is unique or special or different. But I think that it would be hard to argue that the commercial AV industry is not quite unique. There's a certain collegiality that we see in AV Tweep's world of people who really believe in each other and lift each other up and want to support each other and celebrate each other's achievements. And I really don't think, purely as an objective matter, that you see that in all manner of industries. So I think it is something I think that we should celebrate and be part of. It's something that I'm honored to have been taking an increasing part of in the last couple of years. And I know you're right at the vanguard of that as well. And not only does it help one personally, because it brings a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment, but it also helps us organizationally, because that kind of networking and those relationships are just invaluable, especially if you're looking to pivot and transition your organization. There's so many thought leaders who know a whole lot about selling services and selling knowledge and improving client relationships. You can't help but to learn if you immerse yourself in our community.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that was very well put and very well summarized.
If someone wanted to reach you, Steve, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn. At Steve Greenblatt is my handle. If you want to reach my company, Control Concepts, that could be at controlconcepts.net. And I also do some writing and podcasting for various publications, and one of which is AV Nation, where I do the State of Control podcast, which talks about control programming and automation. And I also have one called Ask the Programmer. So I'm glad to get people's feedback on that. And I'm always glad to have some industry conversations. So that's a good way to reach me.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time, Steve, to be on the AV Plus podcast. Incredible conversation. I'm very grateful for you for being here.
No, thanks for having me. This was wonderful. Glad that we've gotten to get to know each other better, and I'm always happy to speak with this audience and share what perspective I can provide.
Well, thank you again. So happy to have been joined by Steve Greenblatt, who is president and founder of Control Concepts. My name is Dan Ferrisi, editor-in-chief of Commercial Integrator. Thank you so much for joining us on AV Plus, and we'll be back here soon with more conversations. Thank you.